When Anna drove away that night, she didn't know she was leaving behind everything she'd built, or that her next home would be made of steel and sorrow. The rain hammered against her windshield as she pulled out of the driveway for the last time, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Her daughter Grace asleep in the back seat clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Behind her, the house she'd spent 15 years filling with memories grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely into the darkness. What started as an ending would become a story the whole country would soon talk about, a story that would challenge everything we think we know about failure, forgiveness, and what it truly means to start over. This is the story of Anna Miller, a woman who lost everything in a single year and found herself living in an abandoned bus on the outskirts of a forgotten town in Ohio. But this isn't just another tragic tale of divorce and desperation. What happened next would turn that rusted metal shell into a symbol of hope for thousands of people across America, and the truth behind what really happened that night when the fire started would shock everyone who thought they knew her story. By the time the smoke cleared and the secrets came to light, Anna's journey would force us all to ask ourselves one uncomfortable question. How far would you go to protect the life you'd fought so hard to rebuild? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how Anna ended up sleeping in a school bus with her 8-year-old daughter, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when life still made sense and the future looked nothing like the nightmare it would become. Anna met Richard Miller in college, both of them studying education at Ohio State University, both of them dreaming of making a difference in the world. He was charismatic and confident, the kind of man who could light up a room just by walking into it, and she was drawn to that energy like a moth to a flame. They married young, bought a modest house in the suburbs of Columbus, and for a while everything seemed to follow the script they'd written for themselves. Richard became a high school principal while Anna taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They had Grace 3 years into their marriage, and for the first few years parenthood brought them closer together in ways they hadn't expected. Weekend trips to the lake, family dinners around the kitchen table, birthday parties in the backyard with homemade cake and too many balloons. From the outside looking in, they were the picture of middle-class stability, the kind of family that made neighbors smile and think maybe the American dream wasn't dead after all. But inside the walls of that suburban home, cracks were forming that nobody could see, fractures that would eventually split their entire world apart. The problems started small, the way they always do. Richard's job became more demanding, pulling him away from home for evening meetings and weekend conferences. Anna found herself handling bedtime routines alone, packing school lunches by herself, attending parent-teacher conferences as a single unit even though she was married. The distance between them grew slowly at first, measured in missed dinners and forgotten anniversaries, in conversations that never quite happened, and apologies that came too late. Financial pressure mounted as medical bills piled up after Grace's appendectomy, as the roof needed replacing, and the car broke down and the credit cards maxed out one by one. They stopped talking about their dreams and started arguing about money, about responsibilities, about who was doing more and who was letting the other down. By year 12 of their marriage, they were barely speaking at all. Richard stayed late at work most nights, and when he did come home, he went straight to his office and closed the door. Anna threw herself into her teaching, staying after school to tutor struggling students, volunteering for every committee and field trip just to avoid going home to the silence. Grace, caught in the middle, became quieter and more withdrawn, her bright personality dimming like a light bulb losing its filament. The house that had once felt full of life now felt like a museum, each room perfectly preserved but empty of anything real, anything alive. They were 3 people living separate lives under the same roof, and everyone knew it couldn't last forever. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday in October, delivered by a process server who apologized as he handed them to Anna at the school where she taught. She stood in the hallway holding the manila envelope, the sounds of children's laughter echoing from nearby classrooms, and felt something fundamental break inside her chest. Richard wanted full custody of Grace, claiming Anna's salary was insufficient to provide adequate care, citing her long work hours as evidence of neglect. He'd already moved out weeks earlier, renting an apartment across town without telling her first, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed space to think. The betrayal of it hit her harder than the divorce itself. The realization that while she'd been trying to save their marriage, he'd already been planning his exit. The custody battle that followed was brutal and exhausting in ways that still haunted her years later. Lawyers picked apart every aspect of her life, questioning her fitness as a mother, suggesting she was too emotional, too unstable, too focused on her career to properly care for her daughter. Richard presented himself as the stable parent, the one with the better income and the flexible schedule, the one who could provide Grace with consistency and structure. Anna fought back with everything she had, documenting every moment she'd spent raising Grace while Richard worked late, providing testimony from teachers and neighbors who knew her as a devoted mother. But in the end, the judge awarded joint custody with Richard getting primary placement, which meant Grace would live with him during the school week and Anna would get her on weekends and holidays. The house had to be sold to split the assets, and after paying off the mortgage and the legal fees, Anna walked away with barely enough to cover a security deposit on a rental apartment. But finding an affordable place in Columbus proved impossible on a teacher's salary, especially one that would accommodate Grace on the weekends. She applied to dozens of apartments, each one rejecting her application because her income didn't meet their requirements or because her credit score had tanked during the divorce. She started sleeping on her friend Jennifer's couch, storing her belongings in a storage unit she could barely afford, picking Grace up for their weekend visits and pretending everything was fine even as her entire life was falling apart. Then she lost her job. Budget cuts at the school district meant letting go of teachers with less seniority, and Anna found herself unemployed in the middle of a recession with a resume that hadn't been updated in 15 years. She applied everywhere, from retail stores to restaurants, from tutoring centers to daycare facilities, but nobody was hiring, and the few callbacks she got evaporated when they learned about her situation. Her savings dwindled to nothing. The storage unit fees went unpaid and her belongings were auctioned off. Jennifer's patience wore thin and Anna found herself genuinely homeless for the first time in her life, sleeping in her 12-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot of a 24-hour supermarket. The first night sleeping in the car with Grace was the lowest point of Anna's entire life. Grace was 7 years old and confused about why they couldn't go to Daddy's house or Aunt Jennifer's place, why they had to brush their teeth in a gas station bathroom and eat dinner from a fast food value menu. Anna tried to make it seem like an adventure, like they were camping under the stars, but Grace wasn't fooled and neither was she. She lay awake that night listening to her daughter's breathing, staring at the ceiling of the car, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. She thought about calling Richard and begging him to help, but pride and fear stopped her. The certainty that if he knew how bad things had gotten, he'd file for full custody, and she'd lose Grace forever. That's when she saw the bus. It was sitting in the corner of a junk lot she passed every day on her way to job interviews, a 1970s school bus painted an ugly shade of green, windows cracked and tires flat, obviously abandoned and forgotten. Something about it caught her attention. Maybe the way the morning light hit the metal. Maybe just desperation making her see possibilities where none existed. She pulled into the lot and walked around the bus, peering through the dirty windows at the interior that was surprisingly intact. Rows of seats still bolted to the floor, the driver's compartment mostly functional, enough space to actually live in if someone was willing to put in the work. The owner of the junk lot appeared, a gruff man named Earl who looked at her like she was insane when she asked how much he wanted for it. $1,000. That's what Earl quoted her, probably expecting her to laugh and walk away. But Anna didn't laugh. She stood there looking at that rusted bus and saw something Earl couldn't see, something nobody else would have seen. She saw a roof over her daughter's head. She saw walls that locked and windows that could be covered for privacy. She saw a chance, maybe her last chance, to keep Grace safe and keep them together. She told Earl she'd take it, writing him a check for the last $1,000 in her bank account, money she'd been saving for food and gas and the other necessities of survival. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but he took the check and signed over whatever paperwork he had and told her she had 2 weeks to get it off his property. Anna spent those 2 weeks transforming that bus from junk into something livable. She scrubbed every surface with bleach and soap, scraping years of grime off the windows until light could actually pass through. She pulled out most of the seats, keeping just enough to create a living space, using plywood and 2x4s from a hardware store dumpster to build a platform bed in the back. She hung curtains she'd sewn from old bed sheets, installed a battery-powered lantern for light, set up a camping stove for cooking. It wasn't much and it certainly wasn't pretty, but it was theirs. And for the first time in months, Anna felt like maybe they'd survive this after all. Grace helped where she could, decorating the walls with drawings and arranging her stuffed animals on the makeshift bed. And Anna tried not to cry when her daughter said it felt like a treehouse on wheels. The bus became their home, parked in a corner of Earl's lot, because he'd taken pity on them and said they could stay as long as they kept quiet and didn't cause trouble. Anna found part-time work at a grocery store, stocking shelves overnight while Grace slept in the bus, Earl checking on her every few hours to make sure she was safe. It wasn't the life Anna had imagined, not even close, but it was stable in its own strange way. They had shelter and food and each other, and some days that felt like enough. She started keeping a journal during those long nights at the grocery store, writing about their struggles and small victories, processing her emotions on paper, because she had nobody else to talk to about what she was going through. One night, unable to sleep after her shift, Anna recorded a video on her phone. She talked about the divorce, about losing everything, about making a home in an abandoned school bus because it was better than the alternative. She talked about Grace and the guilt she felt about putting her daughter through this, about the shame of failure, and the tiny spark of hope that maybe things would get better. She posted the video to YouTube without really thinking about it, without expecting anyone to watch or care, just needing to put her story out into the world so it felt real. She titled it, Life in a Bus Day 1, and went to sleep thinking nothing would come of it. But people watched. Thousands of people, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from single mothers and divorced fathers, from people who'd lost jobs and homes, from anyone who'd ever felt the crushing weight of starting over from nothing. They shared their own stories and offered encouragement, sending Anna messages that made her cry in the best way possible. She started making more videos, documenting their daily life in the bus, showing how they made it work with almost no money and even less space. She wasn't trying to be inspirational, wasn't trying to build a following. She was just trying to survive and letting people watch because their support made the burden feel a little lighter. The channel grew faster than Anna could have imagined. Within 3 months, she had over 200,000 subscribers, people tuning in regularly to see updates on the bus conversion and Grace's adjustment to their unconventional living situation. Donations started coming through, small amounts at first, $5 here and $10 there. But they added up to enough that Anna could quit the overnight grocery job and focus on making their space more livable. She installed a small solar panel on the roof for electricity, bought a portable heater for the coming winter, upgraded their camping stove to something more reliable. The videos showed every improvement, every setback, every moment of frustration, and every small victory, and people kept watching because it felt authentic in a way most content didn't. Local news picked up the story, sending a reporter to interview Anna about her YouTube channel and her unusual living situation. The segment aired during the evening news, portraying her as a resourceful mother making the best of a difficult situation, and the attention brought even more subscribers and donations. Anna was careful with the money, setting most of it aside in savings, using only what they needed for immediate necessities. She knew this couldn't last forever, knew the internet's attention was fickle and could disappear as quickly as it had arrived. But for the first time since the divorce, she felt like she had some control over her life. Like maybe she was building something sustainable that could carry them forward into a better future. Richard found out about the channel through a mutual friend who sent him a link to one of the videos. His reaction was immediate and furious. He filed an emergency motion with the court, claiming Anna was exploiting Grace for profit, that living in a bus constituted child endangerment, that the entire situation proved she was unfit to have custody of any kind. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, and Anna found herself once again fighting to keep her daughter, once again having to justify her choices to lawyers and judges who couldn't possibly understand what desperation felt like. She hired a lawyer with money from the YouTube channel, a woman named Patricia who specialized in family law and believed in Anna's case, but the stress of the impending hearing consumed her every waking moment. The night of the fire, Anna had been editing a video at the small desk she'd built near the front of the bus. Grace was asleep in the back, curled up under the blankets with her stuffed rabbit, breathing softly in the darkness. It was late, past midnight, and the junk lot was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Anna had been struggling with the upcoming court date, worrying about what would happen if Richard won full custody, if this fragile life she'd built came crashing down again. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't smell the smoke at first, almost didn't notice the orange glow starting to flicker outside the windows. When she did notice, the fire was already substantial, flames licking up the side of an old camper trailer parked about 30 feet from the bus. Anna's first thought was Grace. Her second was getting them out. Her third was calling for help. She grabbed her daughter and ran, Grace confused and crying, Anna's heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. They made it to Earl's office and he called the fire department while Anna held Grace and watched the flames spread, terrified they would reach the bus before the firefighters arrived. The trucks came within minutes, sirens wailing through the night, and they managed to contain the fire before it reached their home. But the trailer was completely destroyed and the fear of how close they'd come to losing everything left Anna shaking for hours afterward. The police investigated, interviewing Earl and the few other people who had vehicles stored in the lot. The fire marshal determined the blaze had started deliberately. Traces of accelerant found at the base of the trailer, but they had no suspects and no clear motive. For Anna, it felt personal in a way she couldn't explain, like someone had wanted to hurt her specifically, to take away the one thing she'd managed to hold on to. The paranoia that followed was exhausting, making her jump at every sound, checking and rechecking the locks on the bus door, barely sleeping because she needed to stay alert in case whoever had started the fire came back to finish the job. Then Grace went missing. It was 3 days after the fire, a Saturday afternoon when Anna had walked to the corner store to buy groceries, leaving Grace with Earl, who'd promised to keep an eye on her. She was gone for 20 minutes, maybe less. But when she came back, Grace wasn't in the bus or anywhere in the lot. Earl was frantic, said he'd stepped away to answer a phone call, and when he came back, she'd vanished. Anna's mind went to the worst possible places immediately, images of Grace taken by whoever had started the fire, hurt or scared or worse. She called the police, and they arrived quickly, organizing a search of the surrounding area, questioning neighbors and checking security footage from nearby businesses. They found Grace 45 minutes later at a playground 6 blocks away, sitting on a swing and crying because she'd gotten lost trying to find her way back. She'd wandered off because she'd seen a dog and wanted to pet it, following the animal until she didn't recognize where she was anymore. Anna held her daughter and sobbed with relief, apologizing over and over for leaving her, for putting them in a situation where something like this could happen. The police were understanding but stern, reminding Anna that she needed to be more careful, that the circumstances of their living situation made Grace vulnerable in ways a traditional home wouldn't. It was another mark against her in the ongoing custody battle, another piece of evidence Richard's lawyers could use to paint her as irresponsible. The story hit the news within hours. Bus mom's daughter goes missing after suspicious fire, read one headline. Child endangerment questions raised in viral YouTube case, said another. The comments on Anna's videos turned harsh, people who'd supported her now questioning her judgment, suggesting maybe Richard was right about her being unfit. Others defended her fiercely, pointing out that kids wander off in traditional homes too, that poverty doesn't make someone a bad parent. The division was painful to watch, Anna's life being debated by strangers who reduced complex circumstances to simple judgments. Her subscriber count actually grew from the controversy, people tuning in to watch the drama unfold, and she hated that her worst moments were becoming entertainment for others. The investigation into the fire expanded, police now wondering if it was connected to Grace's disappearance, if someone was targeting Anna deliberately. They looked into Richard's whereabouts the night of the fire, and found he had a solid alibi, attending a school board meeting with dozens of witnesses. They interviewed Anna's ex-friend Jennifer, Earl, people from the grocery store where she'd worked, but nobody seemed to have any motive or opportunity. The case went cold after a few weeks, the police moving on to other priorities, leaving Anna with unanswered questions and the constant fear that whoever had done this might try again. She installed a camera outside the bus, a cheap security system she could monitor from her phone, and slept with her keys in her hand in case they needed to run. Life continued in this state of suspended tension for months. Anna kept making videos because the income sustained them, because stopping would mean admitting defeat, because her subscribers had become a community that felt more like family than most of her actual relatives. Grace started attending a local school again, Anna having found a way to use a friend's address for enrollment, and the routine of drop-offs and pickups gave their day's structure. The court hearing kept getting postponed, delayed by procedural issues and scheduling conflicts, the uncertainty hanging over them like a storm cloud that never quite broke. Anna tried to stay positive in her videos, focusing on the improvements she was making to the bus. But anyone watching closely could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything she was carrying. Then the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday in early spring, delivered to the junk lot by regular mail, Anna's name written in handwriting she recognized immediately. Richard's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope, terrified of what legal maneuver he'd come up with now, what new way he'd found to make her life harder. But inside wasn't a legal document or a threat. It was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, and the first line stopped her cold. Anna, I need to confess something that's been eating me alive for months. I started the fire. She read the letter 3 times, unable to fully process what it was saying. Richard explained everything in painful detail. How he'd been watching her videos, seeing her gain support and recognition while he stewed in resentment. How he'd convinced himself that she was using Grace for sympathy, that the whole bus situation was a manipulation to make him look bad. How he'd driven to the junk lot late one night drunk and furious, intending to scare her but not actually hurt anyone. How he'd poured gasoline on that trailer and lit it, thinking it was far enough away from the bus that it wouldn't spread, that it would just be a warning. How he'd realized too late what he'd done. How close it had come to killing his daughter and his ex-wife, and how the guilt had been destroying him ever since. The letter went on to describe his shame and self-loathing, how he'd been seeing a therapist and finally working through the anger that had consumed him during and after the divorce. How he'd realized that Anna's success at surviving despite his efforts to undermine her custody didn't threaten him. It inspired him. How he'd been wrong about everything, about her fitness as a mother, about the bus being dangerous, about her exploiting Grace. He was turning himself into the police, he wrote, and he wanted Anna to know before she heard it on the news. He wasn't asking for forgiveness because he didn't deserve it, but he needed her to know the truth. He signed it simply Richard, with no other sentiment or explanation. Anna sat in the bus holding that letter and felt emotions she couldn't name. Rage that he'd put their daughter in danger over his own petty jealousy. Relief that she hadn't been paranoid, that her instinct about it being personal had been correct. Grief for the man she'd married who'd become someone capable of such recklessness. Fear about what this would mean for Grace, learning her father had done something so terrible. And underneath it all, a strange kind of closure. The answer to questions that had haunted her finally revealed. She called Patricia, her lawyer, immediately, read the letter over the phone, and they discussed what this meant for the custody case and for Richard's criminal liability. Richard was arrested the next day and charged with arson and reckless endangerment. The story exploded across the news, Anna's YouTube channel gaining millions of views overnight as people who'd followed her story learned about this shocking development. The comments flooded in, most expressing outrage on her behalf, some questioning whether she'd known all along, conspiracy theories spreading despite the clear evidence of Richard's guilt. Anna made a video addressing it all, her face tired and drawn, explaining that she'd had no idea Richard was responsible until the letter arrived. She asked people to respect Grace's privacy, to remember that this was her daughter's father they were talking about, that the situation was complicated and painful and not entertainment for strangers. The court hearing happened 2 weeks later, and with Richard facing criminal charges, his custody petition was dismissed entirely. Anna was awarded full custody, with Richard getting only supervised visitation once his legal situation was resolved, and even that would depend on him completing therapy and proving he was no longer a danger. It was the outcome Anna had been fighting for all along, but victory felt hollow given the circumstances. Grace would grow up knowing her father had tried to hurt her mother, that he'd let jealousy and alcohol turn him into someone dangerous. There was no making that okay, no amount of therapy or apologies that could undo that knowledge once Grace was old enough to fully understand it. The weeks that followed were strange and surreal. Donations to Anna's channel increased dramatically, people wanting to support her after everything she'd been through. But she felt increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. She hadn't asked to become a symbol or an inspiration, hadn't wanted her trauma to be consumed and commodified by millions of strangers. She started therapy herself, working through the complex emotions around the fire and the divorce and the public nature of her private struggles. She focused on Grace, making sure her daughter had access to counseling too, trying to help her process what had happened in age-appropriate ways. Richard pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. At his sentencing hearing, he read a statement apologizing to Anna and Grace, taking full responsibility for his actions, acknowledging the harm he'd caused. Anna didn't attend the hearing, but she read the transcript later, and something in his words felt genuine in a way his apologies during the divorce never had. She realized he'd been broken too during those years, dealing with his own demons and failures, and while that didn't excuse what he'd done, it helped her understand it. She wrote him a letter in prison, not forgiving him, but acknowledging his apology, saying she hoped he'd use his time inside to become someone better for Grace's sake, if not for his own. The bus stayed their home for another year while Anna saved money and looked for more permanent housing. But something had changed in how she saw it now. It wasn't just survival anymore, wasn't just making do with less. It had become a symbol of resilience, of transforming something broken into something functional and even beautiful. She documented the final renovations in her videos, turning the space into something genuinely livable and comfortable, proving you didn't need much to build a home if you had creativity and determination. Grace decorated the walls with paintings and photos, making it truly theirs, and they both grew to love the simplicity of bus life, even as they planned for what came next. Anna used the money from YouTube and a small grant from a nonprofit to start a project she called Second Chance Mobile. She bought 3 more old buses and renovated them with the help of volunteers from her community, turning them into mobile resource centers for homeless families and domestic violence survivors. Each bus contained emergency supplies, information about social services, and most importantly, someone who'd listen without judgment. She partnered with local organizations to park the buses in areas where traditional services couldn't reach, and the response was overwhelming. People who'd been invisible suddenly had access to help, and the buses became known safe spaces where dignity was preserved even in desperate circumstances. The story came full circle when Anna was invited to speak at a conference about homelessness and family services. She stood on stage in front of hundreds of social workers and nonprofit leaders and told her story, not sugarcoating the hard parts or pretending the struggle had been noble. She talked about shame and fear, about the night she'd considered giving Grace to Richard permanently because she couldn't bear to see her daughter living in a car. She talked about the bus and the fire and the complicated process of forgiving someone who'd tried to destroy what little she had. And she talked about transformation, about how the worst period of her life had somehow led to the most meaningful work she'd ever done. Now Grace is 12 now, thriving in middle school, a bright kid with a talent for art and a compassion for others that comes from understanding struggle firsthand. She knows her parents' full story, knows what her father did and why, and she's working through that knowledge with help from therapists and the unconditional love Anna provides. She still remembers living in the bus, but not as trauma, more as an adventure they survived together. She helps with Second Chance Mobile sometimes, drawing pictures for kids in the waiting areas, and Anna watches her daughter turn pain into purpose the same way she did. Richard will be released on parole soon, and they'll have to navigate what relationship, if any, he'll have with Grace. But that's a bridge they'll cross when they reach it. The original bus, the one that saved them, still sits in Earl's lot, now fully restored and converted into Anna's mobile office. She works from it several days a week, coordinating the Second Chance mobile program, making videos that now focus less on her personal story and more on the families her organization serves. She never made the buses about herself, always about the mission, but people still remember where it started. They remember the woman who lost everything and found a way forward in a rusted school bus that nobody else wanted. They remember that transformation is possible even when you're starting from less than zero, that homes are built with love and determination more than money and square footage. Would you have forgiven what Anna did? Let me know in the comments below. And if you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened inside a church basement in Alabama. Subscribe for more true life stories that prove it's never too late for a second chance.